everyone, and thank you for joining us on this presentation from the Global AI Symposium hosted by the CSA. My name is Eric Peters. I am a CISA, CCAK, CCSK, quite a few initial as well. I am a senior manager in a public accounting firm called Weaver, where I work in the IT advisory space, and where, as you can imagine, I spend a lot of time talking to my client around artificial intelligence. And especially one of the topics that comes up very often is how do we do vendor management for AI vendors? What does it mean to obtain the type of assurance, governance, conversation that you used to have with all your vendors? What does that come into in terms of AI? That's a topic that will come up very often. We'll talk about a few things today, especially we'll talk about the granddaddy of governance and compliance, the SOC 2, what role does it play? It does play a role in AI governance. But we'll also talk about the different risks that you have to think about. And immediately, one of the first risks, one of the first considerations that you should have in your environment is make a conscious decision as to who in your organization is going to own AI. And what we mean by that is, as you're all aware, AI touches so many different functions of your organization. There's so many different ways of attacking it. What we are showing on the screen today is a WASP top 10 of all the different threats that can attack AI. And as you can see, they can come from many different places. And one of the reasons they can come from many different places is because it takes so many sources of data, so much elements, so much computing processes to ingest AI and to turn into an output that is reliable, that is very different ways to look at it. At the same time, as you look at it, different team members are going to have a different opinion. AI can be used in manufacturing. It can be used in client services. It can be used to provide additional information for your finance teams. AI is being deployed by technology teams, being deployed by sales teams. So one of the questions that you have to ask yourself is, who is going to own AI? Who is going to dictate how do we use AI? How do we do governance? How do we implement security across the organization? It is all the more pertinent and conversation to be had because more likely than not, AI is already in the organization. We frequently come across organizations telling us, we don't allow AI. We have blocked access to ChatGPT, to Claude, etc., all those different AI tools that you can think of. And typically that is true. They have put in place web filtering, etc. What they don't account very well is two different things. Number one, the same organizations very often give their employees access to their environment through their mobile device. And so you can quickly copy data and then dump it on an AI application that's running on a mobile device. Or number two, a lot of vendors pushed by buzzwords, pushed by the need to show that they're on the front of technology, a lot of your vendors are building AI into their environment. And so one of the questions would be, if a vendor is putting AI in the tools that you're already using, would you know about it? Would they notify you? Would you notice a difference? Or maybe AI is something that they use on the back end to quickly speed the processing of your data. It's something that they use on the back end to improve their data analytics capabilities. And you may not necessarily be aware that AI already exists. At the same time, even if you become aware that AI exists, do you have the ability to turn it off? Does the vendor say, yes, we're using AI, yes, you can turn it off, or does AI become a complete and integral part of their processes to an extent that you cannot turn it off? There's several organizations where you can make a choice and you can choose to move away from one application or the other because you have decided that AI in that application is not worth it. But at the same time, if you're a fund manager, for example, and Bloomberg deploys AI into a Bloomberg system, you're going to get fired if you block Bloomberg. So that conversation around understanding A, who's going to own AI, B, where are we using it, and C, if you choose not to own it, who is going to own it, and are you going to be comfortable with the decision that they make? Are you going to be comfortable with having to accept the consequence of their deployment of AI? Those are considerations that you should be having today as well, even before you start thinking about how do I manage my vendor. Is who's going to be responsible for managing the vendor is really the first part of the conversation that should take place. It's also having the awareness that the level of risk and the level of vendor management that you have to do may also differ from the different types of AI. On the left-hand side, you have the two most common types of AI that we see in place today. Most organizations are still on the left side of this slide. While Gen AI is the hot topic that everybody's talking about, that everybody's trying to get into, we see that the the smart bots, the smart application, the smart ability to read through a policy and summarize a policy, summarize a document. That is more the reactive AI and the artificial narrow intelligence AI piece. And those are the risks on the left-hand side that are very typical to that. As we move to the right side of the screen, as we do see more deployment of Gen AI, as we get into the artificial general intelligence, which, depending on who you believe, is coming tomorrow or is coming never, the types of risk is going to be very different. This is where hallucination, evasion attack, abusive attack become a lot more important. And those are the different considerations that you have to do. So understanding where is AI today in terms of your organization is also going to help you decide what are the risks that I need to be protecting myself against. That is, after deciding who is going to be responsible for AI risk management, is really understanding, well, what is the type of AI that we have? Where do the source come in? Is really the next step in having the ability to really put a vendor management framework around your vendors by really understanding what is the type of risk that my vendors are exposing me to. Now, once you get to that level, there's also the recognition that there's a lot of risks that already exist in any technology environment that are not new to AI. They are AI risks, but they are risks that existed before AI. Availability is probably the most obvious one. If you are deploying an AI tool in your environment, you want that tool to be available. It is as simple as that. If you try today already, you're aware that you can develop or you can start developing AI in your environment, usually by using free accounts or free tools or free credits that many of the AI solution vendors are giving away. And if you've already gone through that process, more often than not, at some point, you have probably realized that your ability to access the tool is either limited or outright blocked simply because they can't keep up with the demand of their system. That in and out of itself is a risk that you have to take into account. But on top of that, there's also the traditional risk of availability in terms of what if the system has an outage? What if the system goes down? What if there's simply too much demand ahead of what they were expecting? Do they have in place the structures and the framework to make sure that the AI tool that you might be developing is going to be there when you need it? DevSecOps is also one that is pretty obvious, pretty easy to understand. AI is effectively a piece of code. If this is a code developer that is developing a tool for you, well, your question is going to be, how secure is that code? How secure was the coding environment? What did they put in place to make sure that their code is of the highest quality, that it wasn't compromised, and that if and when, and more likely when than if nowadays, when they pulled in libraries or they pulled in snippet of code from another source, what did they do to make sure that those things they pulled from other developers were safe to be used in those environments? The DevSecOps is really one of the key aspects of AI that we don't talk about very often enough. As much as we hear conversation around the supply chain and the risk to a supply chain, that doesn't seem to translate very well in an AI environment today. We seem to think that AI is developed 100% in-house, and that's not true. There is very much a supply chain risk to AI, and having that conversation with your vendor, having an understanding as to what is your vendor doing in terms of AI and supply chain risk is also what you need to do to guarantee the safety of your AI environment. And then finally, obviously, one of the most obvious one is data quality. Data quality has been a conversation ever since there has been data, but it's just more pertinent now in the world of AI. But again, there's not a lot that is new in that field either. Maybe you do need to get to a point where you have to have a master data management program. That is probably one of the most difficult to implement well in the data quality field, but that's also going to be one of the most relevant ones. Alongside all those questions around data quality, another question that is good to ask in your environment is to make sure that you have relevant data. AI is really good at one thing, and that is ingesting massive amount of data and providing you an output analysis based on the data that you have ingested, that the AI tool has ingested for you. The question that you have to ask yourself is, are we giving the AI tool relevant data? And what I mean by that, if your organization has completely changed your product, or you have completely changed your strategy, or you have completely changed your go-to-market approach. For example, 10 years ago, you were targeting wholesale customers. Now you're targeting retail customers. Does that 10-year ago data that is related to your wholesale efforts, is it relevant to today's AI? Maybe not. And so maybe instead of feeding all the data that you can to your AI tool, you need to be aware, what is the data that's relevant? Where does it sit? Who owns it? Can I use it? It is also a good conversation to have as your organization has evolved. It could very well be that at some point you decided that for your organization, you did not want to be HIPAA compliant. That is also a use case that we see very often, where organizations were collecting data that was HIPAA data before HIPAA became a thing. And once HIPAA became a thing, they put in place processes to remove the sensitive data, the personal data, from their data collection, but they did not always necessarily go back into their data archive and remove the HIPAA data from those archives, thinking we'll never use them. So what's the problem? Well, if you're putting those data sets into your AI environment, suddenly your HIPAA data becomes part of your AI, which means that your AI becomes subject to HIPAA. The output of your AI potentially becomes subject to HIPAA. So also having the understanding as to what type of data regulation, what type of privacy concern, what type of confidentiality element is applicable to your data, not just today, but in the data archive that you might feed into AI, that is also part of your data quality conversation and your AI management overall. It's really understanding what is the data that am I using? What are the frameworks, the regulations, the practices applicable to the data that I'm feeding, not just today, but also yesterday. All those are part of the data quality effort and potentially a master data management program that you need to implement in terms of getting good use of your AI. Now that we get into the AI race, the new era, as we can call it, one of the key elements is trust AI. How can you trust AI? When you have to think about bias and ethics, you have to think about hallucination. Source data manipulation may be one that is very significant. Prompt engineering is one that we're very familiar with. That is probably one of the most efficient ways that different organizations can misuse AI today, and maybe also one of the most difficult ones that you have to guard against, because you literally have to put in place a process to control every single prompt that goes into the system. Source data manipulation can be a high risk or low risk. It depends a lot on the control that you have in place around that source data. Is it data that you control versus data from a third party that you're ingesting into your AI? And if it is data from a third party, potentially to improve the quality of your AI, new training data, new real world data, do you really understand how that data is being controlled? What is the risk that somebody is able to manipulate that data to provide an output that you did not expect? One of the very common examples that many of you have seen probably on YouTube or in a random meme is when you feed pictures into an AI system. When you look at it with the naked eye, you will not see anything, but somebody can manipulate one pixel in that picture and give it specific instruction to your AI, and your AI is going to read that pixel and potentially follow the instruction in that pixel and give you an output that is completely different than what you expect. So having that in mind is a very key component. Another one, obviously, is going to be the reliability. You've heard many of them already. Some of them have made the headline news. Property rights is a big one. There are still lawsuits open against some of the big AI vendors, such as OpenAI. The New York Times is still very much fighting with them over accusations that they've used New York Times article without permission. If you find yourself with a customer of an organization that is in one of those legal issues, how do you know that the data that you've been trained on is reliable to the extent that the judge isn't going to come down tomorrow and issue a decision saying that the training data needs to be wiped out and that the output of the training data needs to be wiped out as well? Suddenly you may find yourself with an AI that is not as smart as you'd like it to be. The fast-changing regulatory space is the one that we've already seen. A lot of us are probably familiar with SB 1047, which would have been a very consequential regulation in California that was not put into effect. The governor in California decided not to sign it, but that doesn't mean there won't be another one. Most states, to an extent or another, are trying to regulate AI, even if it's a very high level. We've seen AI regulation in a state or another that were so vague that somebody mentioned they might as well have outlawed Netflix recommendations. So really understanding what is each state is going to be doing in terms of AI is also going to be part of the conversation, especially because states say if you're using AI in our state, you're subject to that regulation, whether or not you are based in that state. And for what it comes down to state regulation, the same thing could be done if you're working outside the United States. Every country is also trying to regulate AI. And then finally, the dynamic vendor environment is also a specific concern, not only because some vendors can run out of funding. Nowadays, it's happening more often than we like to, but also we have seen some of the big AI players and some of the big non-AI players, such as Microsoft, Amazon, buying entire companies, not necessarily because they wanted their product, but because they wanted their technology and their people, and they wanted to do something else with it. How can you guard yourself against that approach and your AI vendor suddenly disappearing if it is being acquired or if it's losing funds? The AI governance is really a step-by-step process. And really where you want to start is with a SOC 2, an ISO 2701, or at least an enterprise risk management. As you start evolving that, there are different multiple steps that you are. Most organizations nowadays are still on the first step, the SOC 2 or the ISO 2701. And one of the reasons most organizations are still at that first step is because there's no clarity as to what the next step should be. We'll talk about a few of those next steps in a minute or two, where you can see for yourself, you can rely on the hallucination index. And as you build your maturity environment, as you develop your governance of AI, you can look into the AI risk management framework, and then you can mature into the ISO 42001, which is really at that point becomes a standard that you can be certified again for the management of AI tools, whether you're developing them or implementing them. And then because AI is so new and because so many organizations, including the CSA, are working on them, who knows what's coming next? That is something for you to keep your eye open, for us to be able to talk about together, but there's still not a lot of clarity around that. One of the questions we often have to answer is, why can't we use the existing governance framework? You have some example on the screen, ISO 2701, NIST 800-53. The answer typically is because they were developed at a time where AI was not necessarily a security concern, and at a time where there was not a lot of conversation around AI. And those frameworks typically change and evolve very slowly. Yes, we've just had a new framework for NIST CSF 2.0. 1.1 has been around for more than 10 years. ISO 2022 is starting to become implemented by companies today, but ISO 2701, the previous version was in 2023. Same thing with COBIT, where the last version from COBIT is in 2019, the previous one is 2012. So one of the questions is going to be even is, can those frameworks be adapted? Can there be additional solution frameworks be put into those systems to adapt them from AI? Now, if you do have a SOC 2 from your vendor for AI, those are the typical pieces that you should be looking into. At the very least, the SOC 2 should extensively cover the supporting technology environment. It should also dig deep into a data management control process because data is such critical to your environment. In addition to a SOC 2, you can also get that from ISO 2701, for example, also from a NIST 853. If you do have a SOC 2, ideally, you should ask your vendor to make sure that they include the availability and processing integrity categories as well in that consideration. I would almost say that from the SOC 2 perspective, it's almost a requirement. But that is really your first baseline, your first line of defense in terms of this is what it means to do governance in the AI world. Now, if you remember that maturity evolution, the next step was to be looking at a hallucination index and model-specific approaches. The most common hallucination index that we see is the one that is run by Galileo, where they are basically ranking 22 open and closed source models, and they're really trying to demonstrate not just which one is the most accurate, and that's the term of it, that's the where the hallucination comes in, but they're also trying to demonstrate at the same time what is the cost related to that. So they're really building multiple charts. There's a simple example at the bottom, but they really have dozens of different charts and ranking, where they're trying to demonstrate this is the likelihood that you're going to have an hallucination versus this is the cost of operating that AI. So you can make an informed decision as to, I want less risk of hallucination. Am I willing to bear the cost of going from one model to the next just because that one model provides a little better handling over hallucination? One of the things to keep in mind, they're really looking at the 22 top 2 models, and that's already a big list, but keep in mind that in 22, that includes multiple models from OpenAI, for example. Now, you have a lot of vendors that are building their own AI tools on top of those large models, and those vendors are going to design their own system prompt. So when you look at the hallucination index, if the vendor says we are building it on Claude, have the understanding that the result that you see from Claude in a Galileo hallucination index may not correlate 100% to what you will be experiencing because the system prompt that your vendor is putting on top of Claude may be affecting the result. OpenAI, Anthropic, Google are among the vendors that are trying to develop their own models to give you comfort over what they're doing to maintain the integrity of their AI solution. It's more useful as a tool to be looking at it from an in-house perspective if you're trying to have conversation with different players in your team. If you want to communicate to your different partners, to your stakeholders, to your executive, that you are looking at the different risks you may have. Because each model is different, because each vendor has a different solution, would be very difficult to do a side-by-side comparison. And so this is not necessarily that's going to tell you Anthropic is better than OpenAI, is better than Facebook's model. It's more along the line of if you have made a decision that Anthropic is probably the solution that you're going with, or more likely that the AI vendor that you're going with has built a solution on top of Anthropic, then you can have a communication and conversation in the house and say, those are the things that Anthropic is doing to provide a safe AI. Those are the things that makes us confident that AI built on an Anthropic environment is something that's going to address the typical risk concern that we can see into. At the same time, be aware that, as it says on the slide, they are very information-rich environments. And what I mean by that is they're going to give you extensive reports, and it's going to take a lot of efforts for you to read into them and to understand them. And you may want to ask your vendor to summarize them. You may want to have a conversation with your vendor and say, how does the OpenAI scorecard affect the reliability of your tool? While having the awareness, of course, that there is the risk that we call in the audit world of self-review bias. Yes, they're going to give you as much information as they can, but obviously this is information about their own product, and so they will give you the best angle to interpret the information that they have. The next step in your maturity evolution in terms of AI governance is to look at the AI risk management framework. It's a very good framework that is built by NIST. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with NIST. For those of you not familiar, NIST is National Institute of Standards and Technology run by the US government. It is the organization that issues another very well-known framework, the cybersecurity framework, for example. And the AI risk management framework is not all that different than CSF, to the extent that it's really defining more a collection of practices that it's recommending. It is not necessarily telling you must do these things. It's saying you should aim for this goal. And it's very much driven by an analysis of the risk to your environment. So one of the bedrock of that risk management framework is having the ability to conduct your own risk assessment. And if you don't have that, then potentially you may need to find a vendor that will help you develop that risk management framework. What the AI risk management framework from NIST does very well is that it comes with playbook and profile that is supporting the implementation. The profile, the most common profile that we see now that has really been developed, although it's not totally ready, it's called the NIST AI 600. And it is really NIST's interpretation of saying, if you're doing the AI risk management framework, and specifically for Gen AI, this is what it means. As it says, one of the focus of the AI risk management framework is to build AI that is trustworthy. Trustworthy means that it is secure, that is giving you reliable information, that it does not present risk to human life, that it is giving you information that it owns, that is actionable, that is valid. And that NIST AI 600 document is really going to go into the details in terms of what does that mean from a Gen AI perspective. The playbooks are a long collection of guidance and suggestions that you can implement to meet the 4 different functions, the govern, map, measure, and manage functions that are in the AI risk management framework. After you read the framework, you're not entirely sure as to, well, what does that mean? How do I really manage AI in my environment? How do I implement that best practice that the management framework is recommending? The playbook is going to have 25, 30, 45 different recommendations that you can look at. For what we consider to be today, but maybe potentially, as we talked about a few minutes ago, not tomorrow, the most mature way to manage AI in your environments, it is ISO 42001. For those of you who are very familiar with ISO and ISO 2701, for example, it is a management standard. It is a management standard the same way as ISO 27001 is a management standard. And what that means is that it comes with a very strong set of management practice, governance. It really pushes you to start thinking about developing your AI policies and to make sure that you cover AI from every potential risk and from every potential aspect. So it's not just the operation of AI, but it's also the development of AI, the acquisition of AI, the governance of AI. It is a very emphatic documentation around how do you do governance. And it comes just like every other ISO standard with very prescriptive and detailed controls and control objectives that have extensive implementation guidance. And that is why we think overall that if you are looking to move your maturity across a scale, starting with the an ISO 27001 or a SOC 2, then looking at the Galileo and the hallucination index, potentially looking at what your own vendors are doing, evolving to the AI risk management framework is one of the most mature steps that you can do. And if you're really ready to get to a point where you want the most mature environment that you can demonstrate today, and you want to be able to be audited against it to demonstrate that you have that in place, or you expect a vendor to be audited against it, ISO 42001 is really the top of the chain at this point in time. Now, if all of that, the only thing that you really can get is a SOC 2, and you don't have the time, you don't have the resources to really get further into the detail that we just mentioned, then what you should be thinking about is really gaining a deep understanding of what is that SOC 2. If your vendor gives you a SOC 2 that is addressing only security, ask them point blank, why is there not availability? Why is there not processing integrity? Review the test procedures, go look at the list of controls, go look at what the SOC 2 auditors did. Did they perform an inquiry only, which means really did they just ask questions, or did they sample the evidence? Did they go beyond the what are you doing and go to the show us what you're actually doing? What is also going to be very important when you look at the SOC 2, because one of the benefits of the SOC 2 is that it's so extensible and can be customized and defined to the needs of the company that's issuing one, really understand what is the scope of that SOC 2 and what are the boundaries. Are they relevant to you? Are they looking at the AI model that you're using? Is it focused on the development of an AI model or on the operation of an AI model? Or is it both? And finally, define your expectations. Because a SOC 2 is a complex document that can be difficult to read because it is so flexible. Really understand what am I looking for out of that SOC 2? And really go down, create your own checklist, go through the list of controls and really check them off one at a time and says, I have found what I need. And then finally, not on the slide, but a recommendation that we still have to do from time to time, make sure that you actually read the auditor's opinion letter. Very often it looks like the same across every SOC 2. But make sure that you understand the result and that it is a good, not qualified opinion, and that the auditor was satisfied that the controls were in place. Now, what should you do if there's absolutely nothing available, not even a SOC 2? That becomes a question where at that point, you sort of kind of have to take the lead and you have to go to your vendor and say, those are the things that I use as reference. Please help me assess yourself against those different references. We started with OWASP, that little diagram on the right-hand side. That is one of the ways where you can have a conversation with your vendor along how do they manage their AI risk. OWASP Top 10, for those of you who are not necessarily familiar with it, creates a list of the 10 biggest threats across multiple functions, across multiple tools, across multiple services, and there is one around AI. And so that is part of a conversation starter you can have with your vendor where you can say, this is what OWASP has to say around the top 10 threats. If I bring in AI in my environment, what are you doing around them? What are you doing to secure myself against those threats? But some of those threats are going to point back at you. And so that's also an opportunity to say, these are the risks that we bring in-house if we bring an AI tool, and what can we do about it? Other than OWASP Top 10, the SIG questionnaire that many of you may be familiar with, this is something that is very common to replace a SOC 2 and ISO 27001 where the vendor doesn't have one. There are even companies that even when they receive a SOC 2 from their vendor, they still send them a SIG questionnaire to fill out. One of the benefits of the SIG questionnaire is that it ties to multiple frameworks. So if you already have a framework of reference in your environment, you decide to comply with NIST 853, for example. You can take a SIG questionnaire and say part of those questions feed directly into the objective of my 853 framework. And so I can show that I am addressing my AI threats through my NIST 853 framework. There's a SIG questionnaire that is specific to AI that you can rely upon. Another alternative is the AI model risk management framework that is being built by the CSA. I think the first version has been released, and there's probably multiple sessions in this symposium that will be talking about it. So this is only a very high-level description. It is the ability to develop model cards and think about what is the risk that we're trying to address. What is the use case scenario to really concretize this risk, make it a viable risk, make it an existing risk as opposed to a pie in the sky risk, and what are we doing about it? It is also built very well in order to have conversations with your internal and external stakeholders, meaning you can use them to talk about AI risk with your vendors, but you can also use them internally to communicate those are the risks that we see, this is what we're doing about them, and ask different functions in the environment who may not be as comfortable or as confident thinking in terms of risk. It's like, hey, if we bring AI in-house, what does it mean for your function? What does it mean for your team? And guiding them through that model risk management framework from the CSA may help them define the different risks. So that was a lot of information. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, and I'd be more than happy to answer your question at any time. But really what we wanted to emphasize in this short presentation is really, first and foremost, understand who is using AI and how they're using it today. That is going to be how you start your risk approach to managing AI. Decide who's going to be owning the risk the risk of AI in your organization. And then while it is clear that at this point there is not one good AI governance model in place, because AI is already in place, because somebody wants to use it, it is time for you to already think about doing governance. Start putting your governance in place. Understand that what you do today may change tomorrow, that you may have to evaluate the different maturity steps that we talked about, and that even if you implement ISO 42001 today, they may still be coming something new tomorrow that you have to prefer. You still have to put that governance today. You can't wait. And then finally, how much can you rely on your vendor? Hopefully, we've given you some tools to start those conversations, to think beyond the traditional SOC 2 and to go about, hey, vendor, the SOC 2 isn't enough. It's a start, but I need more. What else are you doing? I thank you for your time. Hopefully, this was helpful, and I look forward to your questions.